All right, we want to come together this morning, and the title of the talk is concentration versus focus. And this kind of carries on to where we've been in the last few weeks. What are we here for? How does our spiritual practice help us to grow, to grow? And by growth, we define that as being more consciously aware of the experience of the presence and the activity of God. That's our spiritual growth. And sometimes we as human beings make things way harder than they need to be. There's something in the ego, I think, that tells us that if there's no pain, there's no gain. If it's not hard, it's not good. And because of that, we tend to take things that of their very own, they should be easy. And yet we find a way to make them hard. And I've used this before, but if you take the example of the game of basketball, when basketball first started, the average player was a little over 5 feet tall, and the height of the hoop or the basket above the ground was set based on that. And then over time, what we did was we found taller and taller people to play the game. So now the players are well over 6 feet, some of them over 7 feet. And the game became easier and easier because they were taller and taller. So what they did was they introduced the three-point shot. They found a way to entice players to shoot for the basket from further away. In other words, they had to make it difficult again. They had to find another way to make it difficult. Because people want things to be difficult. They want things to be hard, And sometimes we make things hard that don't need to be hard, that shouldn't be hard. Being in love shouldn't be hard. Not a struggle. I see this on TV all the time. People say, you really got to work at your relationship. I'm sure people do. But maybe if we're working at love, we're doing it wrong. We're doing it wrong. So we want to come to this idea then about concentration being working hard at something, and perhaps working hard at something that we ought not to be working hard at. And focus is just simply keeping our eyes on the goal, keeping our eyes on what's important, just maintaining focus. No pressure. The Buddhists call it the perfect balance between peace and energy. Right? We're at perfect peace, but we have energy. And we use that energy to remind ourselves, to recall. If you want to explore more of these ideas on your own, if you search the internet for the Buddha's Discourse on Recollection, I think you will find several articles there that will kind of help explain these ideas in more detail. And maybe if you read those during the week, maybe you'll kind of get things out of that weren't here today, or you didn't hear today, kind of builds on us. So if you read the email I sent out last night, I used Aesop's fable of the sun and the wind having a bet about who could make the man take his cloak off first, And I don't recall the entire fable, but as I do, the parts I do recall are that the wind was going to go first. So the sun retired behind a cloud, and the sky got, dark and gloomy. And it started to get cold. And the man pulled his cloak tighter around his body, covering himself up. And then the wind started to blow. And the wind huffed and puffed, and it just blew as hard as it could to try to blow the cloak off of this man. But all the wind blowing did was make him hold on tighter. So the wind finally got tired and gave up. And the sun came out from behind the cloud. And the sky brightened. And the sun shone down on this man, just steadily, brightly. And as the sun continued to shine on him, he got warmer and warmer. And finally he took his cloak off and he threw it over his arm and started carrying it. So of course in Aesop's fable, he was kind of talking about human relations. He was talking about how, kind of, as Abraham Lincoln put it, it's easier to catch, you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar, That in human relations, sometimes we try to force people to do what we want them to do. And in the act of trying to force them to do it, well, they just resist us more. The more, kind of like raising teenagers, the more you tell them what you want them to do, the more they figure out ways that they're not going to do that. It's just that dynamic. The way to get people to do what you want them to do was to make them want to do it, or help them find a way to want to do it. It might be a better way of saying it. And of course, salespeople are trained in this. When I was learning to sell, one of the things that we learned is a little mantra that people do not want because they have reasons. They have reasons because they want. So if if you go to somebody and say, well, why did you buy this particular car? Well, they will tell you, well, I bought this particular car because it gets so many miles in a gallon, and these days they'll tell you how many cup holders it has, and it has 21 cup holders, like we're going to use them all at once. But they have reasons, but the reasons are not really why they bought the car in the first place. These are the reasons that they have to justify the purchase. So the salesperson's job was to try to find out what people really wanted, and then give them the reasons that purchasing whatever they were selling would help them address what they really wanted. So you find out what they want, and then you give them reasons to kind of justify that. And as an example, today, much of the car advertising is geared towards children. And the reason for that is when the parents go to the showroom, they bring the kids, and the kids come and see the car that they saw on TV in a commercial that was slanted towards them. And the kids say, Mommy, Daddy, let's buy this car. Let's buy this one. I want this one. It's got a DVD player in the back and we can watch movies or whatever, And what Mommy and Daddy really want, is they want to make the kids happy. So then the salesperson starts coming over and giving them all the reasons why this particular vehicle is going to make the kids happy. We got the DVD player in the back. We've got all of these armrests that'll separate the kids so they each have their own space. We've got all of these little cup holders so they can put their drinks in here, and on and on and on. So people do not want because they have reasons. They have reasons because they want. And if we can figure out what they want, we can help them want to do whatever it is that we want them to do. That's kind of the basic meaning of that fable, and the way Lincoln paraphrased it. But I want to take it to a different place today. I know that Aesop was talking about something totally different, but I find it applicable to our own selves, okay? Our own selves and our spiritual growth. So each and every one of us is that person walking down the lane in a cloak. I'm going to get another drink here. And each and every one of us is at time the wind, and each and every one of us is at time the sun, in the way that we treat our own self, in the way that we try to motivate our own self. Now, I'm smiling because if you stop and think about it, who is the one being motivated and who is the one trying to do the motivation? Aren't we one and the same? And the answer is both yes and no. I mean, We are just an incredible, incredible creation of life. We can treat ourselves as both a subject and an object at the same time. There's nobody else in there, nobody else in our consciousness doing that to us. At least not that we know of, not that we're aware of. So at times we try to find a way to motivate ourselves through concentration, through willpower, through scrunching up our eyes, through trying to make things more difficult than they need to be. That's when we're acting like the wind. And what we're trying to do, what I'm talking about today, of course, is not taking a cloak off, but it's engaging in our spiritual practice, engaging in our spiritual practice. Then there's other times that we find ways to be gentle with ourselves, to find out what is it that you really want. Why do you want to engage in spiritual practice? What is it that you hope to get out of this thing that you call spiritual practice? Maybe it's peace, maybe it's love, maybe it's ego, maybe we just feel better about ourselves because we've done it, But if we can find out what it is that we truly want, then perhaps we can find ways to help ourselves engage more willingly, more consistently, without a sense of struggle, without a sense of strain, without a sense of, I have to do this. I hear sometimes folks will say, well, I have to go do my spiritual practice now. I have to go do my work now. And if we have to make ourselves do it, if it's work, if it's a chore, if it's a struggle, then it's, we're probably better off not doing it because we're being counterproductive. You can't force yourself to relax, So this is what we're talking about today, the difference between concentration and using our will and focus, just staying focused. Now the other example I gave is also one that I've used before, but it's very appropriate, and that is when I was a kid in the Scouts, we learned how to make a fire using a magnifying glass. And in fact, if you watch the survival people on TV, they now show you how you can take a plastic water bottle, the kinds that you get at the convenience store for like $1 that have water in them, and you can actually use that to make a lens to focus the sun's rays to create a fire in the wild. So we learned how to make the fire. Now, there were certain things certain kind of preconditions that we had to observe, Of course, they were always teaching us safety, so you can imagine that the fire was in a pit that was made out of stone. And in there you had kindling, which was dry, and then you had twigs over it, which were also dry. And of course, if you ever started a fire, you get the kindling going, you get the twigs going, and then you add more and more twigs till you get the fire going, and then you start to put on little thicker pieces of wood, little thicker branches, until you have your fire going. So we had to know, we had to find the dry firewood. It was a prerequisite. We had to find the dry firewood. We had to build the pit. We had to make sure it wasn't too windy, and if it was, then we had to build it in a place that was sheltered from the wind. But the most important thing was the sun had to be out, of course. That was a prerequisite. But you had to use the lens to bring the sun's rays into focus. You had to bring them into a pinpoint focus somewhere in the kindling. And you had to maintain that focus. See, the sun could be out, the kindling could be dry, the wind could be calm, but if you kept moving that magnifying glass all over the place, in, out, up, down, side to side, you were never going to get a fire started. Never. It took consistency. See? It took focus. You had to remember, what are you trying to do here? We're trying to start a fire. I'm trying to start a fire. Now, the sun has got enough energy to start the fire through the lens. That's not a question. The only question is if I can maintain my focus long enough to get the result that I'm looking for. So I invite you to keep that in mind when we're thinking about our spiritual practice and our spiritual growth. Our spiritual growth then is defined, for today's purpose, we are defining it as our conscious awareness, our conscious realization of the experience of the presence and the activity of God. That's our spiritual experience. Okay? Growing into that, experiencing that a little bit more every day, perhaps every hour of every day, but growing into that, can we look back to where we were a month ago and say, I'm experiencing this any more than I was a month ago or 2 months ago, whatever it takes. That's our growth. That's the end, if you want to consider it an end. It's not the end because it's really only the beginning. But for an example today, that's the goal that we intend to reach. And then our spiritual practice consists of the techniques that we use to get there. It's just that simple. If you were trying to lose weight, for example, that might be your goal. And diet and exercise might be the techniques that you use. Spiritual practice is your technique. Okay? Spiritual growth is your goal. So what tends to happen, particularly to us here in the West, is that we find a way to make this much more difficult than it needs to be. We tend to find a way to try to dominate and to control things and to use our willpower, our third chakra. We try to use our willpower to impose our desire. And in this case, we're imposing it upon our own self. And the harder you try, the less likely you are to succeed. You remember the old story about the king in the Mideast who offered his palace free of charge to anyone on one condition: they spend the night in that palace and not think of a white elephant. Yeah. And of course it can't be done. It can't be done. If you're trying not to think of the white elephant, you're thinking of the white elephant. That's the example that we're trying to give us. So if we come back a little bit and think about the things that we've been saying for the last few weeks and think about where we are in our experience, and we have to understand where we are. We can't start from where we want to be. We can't start like halfway down the road. You can't go to the gym and say to yourself, well, I can't do any push-ups now, but my goal is to be able to do 40, so therefore I'm going to start with 20. Well, you can say that, but you're not going to be able to do it, because when you get down on the floor, if you can't do any push-ups, you can't do any push-ups. You can't say, well, you can't start and say 21, 22. We have to start where we are. So let's think for a minute about where we are and where we want to be. So, given that the divine is ineffable, we don't have the words to describe it. We attribute to it peace and calm and poise. Stillness, complete stillness. It does, but without a sense of struggle or strain. Its doing is a natural outpicturing or consequence of its being. This is illustrated to us in the mythology of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, there was this chaos, and God spoke, "Let there be," and there was. You know, we didn't hear any reports there of a lot of struggle, of a lot of strain. God worked really hard to create the universe. It just simply says, God spoke its word, "Let there be," and there was, and there was. So its active creation follows its intention. And because it is all-powerful, omnipotence, it does. It simply does. It is omniscience. It knows all that there is to know. It doesn't have to struggle to find out. It doesn't have to inquire. It doesn't need a process of learning. It simply knows. And it is from this stillness and this calmness and this peace that we all come. That we all come. We have come here to express its life. We have come here to develop unique personalities through which it might express, experience, and enjoy itself. And in order to develop into our uniqueness, we had to forget. We had to forget everything that we knew about where we come from. In some traditions, the teaching is that we, the soul, we decide to incarnate. We decide to come to this earth for a particular reason. And when we do, we find a womb, we find a mother, we find a little body that's ready to accept us. And the teaching, this comes from some of the teachings in the Kabbalah, that while we are in the womb, while the little fetus is developing, while the little body is growing, the soul is still keenly aware of everything. And it's accompanied by an angel. And this angel is explaining to this little soul everything that it's going to need in order to fulfill whatever purpose it came to fulfill in this lifetime. And when the angel has imparted all of the wisdom, all of the knowledge, explaining everything that this little soul is going to need to know, the angel takes its finger and taps it across the lips like this. The finger's held up vertically and taps across the lips. And this is where that little indentation underneath our nose comes from. Now, it's a beautiful story. You know, I don't for a minute believe it's literally true, but it's a beautiful story in that it kind of explains that when it taps us, we forget. We forget. In other cultures, we are told that we have had ignorance heaped upon us. In still other cultures, we are told that mankind has fallen. We have fallen from that state where we knew. And no matter how we got here, right, the consensus seems to be that we don't remember. Through our ignorance, we don't remember. And our life's journey then is a process of remembering, of recalling, of getting ourselves back. You know, as Judy Collins said, we're trying to get ourselves back into the garden, to get ourselves back. We're trying to remember our way home. The Buddhists would tell us, you know, we don't know how the game started. All we know is that we're here and the game is in progress. And we're trying to figure out how it all works so we can play the game well. So it doesn't do us any good to ask what life is. We're alive. That's all we know. Dr. Holmes tells us the same thing. Nobody can answer that. We're just alive. That's all. So we're here and we find ourselves here. We find ourselves alive and we're trying to figure it all out. And we can through logic and reason and through listening to the experiences of other people who have had spiritual experiences, we become aware of this stillness, this suchness, this oneness, this mystical experience, the freedom from attachments, the nirvana, all these different terms by which it is called. So I need to stop right there for just a moment and interject this idea that the purpose of religion, the root word for religion is to bind together. It is the same as the root word for yoga or yoke, right? To yoke together, to join together. So what is it we are trying to join together? What is it that we're trying to bind together? And why does it need to be bound together in the first place? These are kind of the things that we're asking. And for today, just try to consider that we are trying to bind together, of course, all things into the oneness. But we're trying to bind together our own self with that from which we came. We are trying to have that experience of oneness, that experience of unity, that experience of isness or suchness that is called the mystical experience or the cosmic consciousness or the oneness. All religions, or most religions, start when somebody has that experience. Moses experienced the burning bush, a deep meditative experience, the fire that burns but does not consume. Elijah rode a chariot of fire to the heavens. These are descriptions of the ineffable, of the indescribable. Mary experienced the angel Gabriel at the Annunciation. Jesus experienced the presence of God so fully. He said, I and the Father are one. Paul, who never met physically the person Jesus, but Paul was blinded by the light. He was knocked off the horse. He had this experience of the risen Christ. And most of what we have in Christianity today comes from the efforts and the teachings of Paul. Muhammad experienced the angel in the cave. Joseph Smith experienced the angel, and the Mormon religion followed. So what happens is somebody somewhere has this experience, and then the religion kind of comes up around it, and it is full of practices. And these practices should be designed to help us to each have our own experience. But what happens over time is that more and more the religion becomes about the religion itself and not about the experience, not about encouraging the adherents to have that experience. Simply obey the rules, come to church on Sunday, put your money in the plate, those kind of things. What we are trying to bind together is ourselves with that experience. So spirituality is about having your own experience. It is about engaging in your practice for that purpose of having your own experience. So the reason that our spiritual practice, that we do our spiritual practice, is to grow in that experience, which to some people come in a flash and lasts a while. To others it's just a glimpse. It comes and goes. Some keep working and never experience it or never recognize that they experience. But nevertheless, that's what our practice is for. And along those lines, if you want more information there, read Richard Maurice Buck's book on cosmic consciousness. That's the title, R.M. Buck, B-U-C-K-E, and it's available. It's in the public domain because it was written in 1900. So it's available. I think it's at the Internet Archives in PDF format. And he describes all of these things that I'm talking about. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to get back home, so to speak. But what has happened to us is we are here in this world. We're in this world, but we're not of this world. And we get caught up in the activities of this world. And we as human beings make up all kinds of rules and regulations and the way things are and the way things ought to be and this, that, and the other thing. And we get caught up in that. We get caught up in that as if it was reality. And it's not. It's just an agreed upon dream is the best way to put it. If we get up in the morning, this morning the clock radio went off, and before I was even out of bed this morning, you know, I was being bombarded with news stories of what was going on in the world, you know. Boom, right then my mind is starts to get filled with activity. And I start to assign meanings to these things, you know. So all they might say is that such and such happened. And then my mind starts assigning, we put labels on things. My mind starts assigning meaning to these things. And that's what we do. We kind of go through life and we try to find a label to put on something, and we think because we remember the name of the label we understand what that thing is. Of course we don't. We just remember the label for it. And then we get caught up in that. See, we hear something and the label comes up to us, and then whatever emotions or whatever feelings, whatever mood we have attached to that, we start to experience that. And we think that that is real. And now we aren't even reacting and responding to the world as it is, but we are caught up in a world that is entirely made up in our thoughts, or the thoughts that we believe are ours. And we're just chasing these thoughts everywhere. The Buddha said we're like a monkey swinging through the trees, trying to find fulfillment. Other teachers say it's like we're following a stray dog. So there's something within us that causes us to seek. Okay? That which we are seeking is causing us to seek. We are wired for God, I think was a book by that title some years ago. But we are sort of pre-programmed. There's that within us which has this faint glimmer that we kind of remember. We kind of remember that we're supposed to be looking for. And we go about looking for it in material things, in people, in circumstances, in situations. And we go from thing to thing to thing to thing, to person, to experience. And we're never quite satisfied. We're never completely fulfilled. There's always more. This is why I think, you know, if you read some of the science fiction novels about the immortals, you know, about any creature that has become immortal, they tend to get bored. You know, their existence is just complete boredom. They've lived for hundreds of years and they've just done the same things over and over and over again. And it's just empty. And all they're doing is living. All they are doing is living. So we recognize then that there is that within us which is causing us to seek. But because of the activity of mind, because of the activity of culture, because of all these things, we're looking where we're never going to find it. Now, our curiosity assures that we're going to find it, but it's only when we turn within, when we stop looking out there, and we start looking at what is mind, how does mind work, what are these thoughts, where do these thoughts come from, and is there a way to slow them down? So this is what recollection is about. in order to stop our monkey mind from wandering all over the place, we give it something to focus on. Okay? We don't concentrate and say, now you're going to stop thinking. No more thoughts. That's it. Nope. That's the last one. Nope. This time I really mean it. This is you can't do that. You see, the harder you're like the wind blowing against a cloak. The harder you try to make your thoughts stop, the less likely they are to stop. But if you give them something else to focus on, then the noise will subside. So recollection or remembering is mindfulness. Is mindfulness. Why am I here? I am here to remember. What am I here to remember? That I am already one with that which I am seeking. And how am I going to remember? I'm going to remember by focusing on now, focusing on right here, focusing on right now. I'm going to be mindful. Now, the easiest way to do that, of course, is to start with breath and just be aware. And don't try to fight it, don't try to force it, don't try to breathe in a certain way, none of that. Just become aware. Breathing is occurring. Inhale, gap, exhale, gap, inhale. That's it. That's it. Now, discipline is training. Discipline is kind of learning the way things need to be done. And in the Bible, we are given many examples of God as a shepherd. And the shepherd would discipline the little sheep. It had the staff with the crook on the end, and if they were walking in a little lamb kind of strayed away too far, the shepherd would just reach over and grab it with the hook and just gently bring it back until it learned to stay close. And that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to struggle. We're not trying to fight. We're not trying to force. We're not trying to use willpower and concentration. We're just remembering. So if we're sitting in meditation and a thought comes up and it distracts us, and that's the key point, it distracts us, we become engaged with it, we just simply say, thinking. That's it, thinking. And we bring ourselves back to our breath. Another thought comes up over here. Thinking. And we bring ourselves back. By remembering, by reminding ourselves that we have choice. We can let our mind wander willy-nilly and we can go chasing it everywhere. Or we can choose to remember and focus. Now, it's not easy at the beginning, right? Because when we do that, our mind kind of puts up a fuss. You know, it's almost like logging onto the internet and you got all these little pop-up ads flashing in your face. Pay no attention. Thinking. Thinking. That's all there is to it. We can do it while we're walking. It is walking meditation. If you do that, as your foot comes up, you think lifting. As your foot moves, you think moving. As your foot comes down, you think stepping. That's all. That's it. Be here. Be in the now. Because what happens, what we want to keep in mind is that experience, that experience of the unity, that experience of the oneness, that experience of the allness, that which we're trying to bind ourselves to, is the best way I can describe it on the other side of the screen of our awareness. You know, remember a couple of weeks ago I said, imagine you're in a movie theater and these thoughts are just coming up on the screen. What's behind the screen? The peace, the calm, the isness, the suchness. when we simply remember what we're doing, when we are simply mindful in the moment, we start to experience the other side of the veil, the other side of the screen. So as we go forward in our spiritual growth, then it's not something that we have to make ourselves do. It's not work. It's not something we have to force ourselves to do. What we are reminding ourselves of is what we really want. What do you really want, you know? The parents in the car showroom want to make the children happy. That's what they want. What is it you really want? Do you really want to go back home? Do you really want to experience the peace? Do you really want to experience the calm and the poise and the love, the incredible love, the experience of oneness, the experience of unity? That is our true nature, our true nature. So if you have been experiencing any sense of struggle in your spiritual practice, try just remembering, why is this important? Is it more important than anything else that I can think of doing right now? Those little questions that pop up in your head, and you have to go to the internet just right now to find out who wrote that song, who starred that movie? Or is just being at home with the beloved the most important thing we can do right now? We be gentle with ourselves, we love ourselves, and most importantly, release all expectation of what needs to happen, what's going to happen, what should happen, and just sit in a comfortable position. You don't have to fold your legs, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. And just be here now. As we learn to do that in our practice, see, then we learn to do it in our lives. When we are with someone, we are with them. When we are working, we are fully engaged with what we are doing. We are mindful at all times that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, to express, to experience, to enjoy life in some particular way, to allow God to have that experience through us, to cooperate with God having that experience through us. And eventually the us goes away, the me goes away, the I goes away. And there's just love. There's just love. So don't try to force it. Just remember it. Just maintain focus. Just take out that magnifying glass, which is your ability to choose, and just maintain that focus for a little while. Just for a little while. Don't worry about what happened. Don't try to analyze it when you're done. Don't try to say, gee, did I do that right? Did I have the experience I was supposed to have? That's the mind, that's the monkey mind taking us astray. At most, just give thanks. Just give thanks. One of the things Joel Goldsmith says he tells his students is they should meditate 5 times a day. Their spiritual growth is directly in proportion to how much time they spend in meditation. And when they meditate at the very end, to just give thanks and say, through this meditation, a greater awareness of the presence of God has entered this plane of existence. That's your focus. A greater awareness of the presence of God which is only available now. The past is gone, the future is yet to come, but now, the eternal now, God is here. Have fun, enjoy, be love, maintain focus, and so it is.